All right, this guy's on. This guy's on.
Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna get started here since it's already 6:15. So I'm Eric Sorenson. I'm the organizer of MadJS. Thanks for coming. You can follow us on Twitter at MadJavaScript, and you can follow us on YouTube. Thanks to Hani for making all these videos. I think we have like 9 months worth of these already. So if you just do a search for MadJS, you can find them on YouTube. We still have apparel for sale, so if you want to get a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or something like that, we have a bunch of different colors and styles, and we have shirts for HTML5 and Angular and CSS, all that stuff. And you can find details on all of that at our website at madjavascript.com. It also has the official code of conduct, but if you want to get links to the sponsors or get a deal on books from O'Reilly, check out videos, see what events are coming up, that's all there. So we want to thank our new sponsor this month, SATURN Systems. Thanks for the pizza. Chris is here to tell you what they'd like everybody to know.
And I don't work for SATURN Systems, but I thank them for the pizza. SATURN Systems says we are looking for solid cross-browser web developers with strong JavaScript skills. In these positions, you will perform development and testing of complex web-based software. You will use your communication skills to work effectively with clients and teammates, all in an agile environment. This is an excellent opportunity for you to take the next step in your career. These positions are in our corporate offices in Duluth, Minnesota, on the shores of Lake Superior, one of the best places to live in the country. Apply online at www.saturnsys.com/careers.aspx.
Thanks, Chris, and another thanks to SATURN Systems. Any other announcements? Anybody? No. All right. Well, like I said, I'm Eric Sorenson. You can follow me on Twitter at @Harmonic, and you can go to my blog at theharmonic.com, which is admittedly kind of lame right now, but I'm going to be adding stuff there soon. A bit about me: I've been working on web development stuff, mostly front end, for about 4 years. I've written apps in jQuery and Backbone, and I'm working on one right now in Angular. And I've been doing MadJS for 3 years now. I think this is the 3rd anniversary right here. So, yeah. I work at Primex Wireless, which is a company in Lake Geneva, so I work remotely. I split my time between Madison and suburbs of Chicago. And right now we're building a really large app in Angular 1.3. And we're using the CoffeeScript, Jade, and Stylus preprocessors using Gulp and Require.js. At Primex, we're doing a platform for Internet of Things. So this involves a lot of different sensors that use wireless networks to all bring a bunch of data together, and then it's processed and displayed to the user so they can be notified of things. Like a good example of what we're doing is we put sensors in refrigerators because those refrigerators have really sensitive stuff like medication, for example. And if the temperature in the refrigerator gets above a certain level, those medications can go bad. So people really, really care about knowing that the refrigerator is working right, and we help them do that. So pretty cool stuff. Before we get started talking about JavaScript in OS X, this last month was a huge month as far as news goes. There's a ton of really, really interesting stuff on the horizon when it comes to browsers specifically. I thought it would be a good idea to go over some of this stuff. So first, probably want to set some groundwork for some of the other crazy things going on. There are a lot of moving pieces here. More than I ever expected, to be totally honest. One of the biggest ones is that HTML5 is now a W3C standard. Yeah, I know. It's like I had the impression that this had already happened, but turns out it hasn't. So no more excuses to switch to HTML5. So take this as a reason to go through all the apps that you're working on and make sure that the doc type isn't something crazy like HTML4 or XHTML. And if you ever needed a reason to persuade your manager to work on something like this, I think this is a good reason. So a few more things to talk about as far as the core web technologies. ECMAScript6 is going to be finalized soon. So ECMAScript is the standard version of JavaScript. Few people talk about this, but the version of ECMAScript that's in Internet Explorer is not actually JavaScript. They can't legally call it that. It's called JScript still, because Java has that copyright. So if you want to be politically correct, you call it ECMAScript. ECMAScript3 was what we used in IE8 and below. ECMAScript4 was what we used to deal with Flash stuff, like ActionScript is usually what people call it. ES5 is what we're most familiar with. That's what's in most modern browsers right now. But full browser support for ECMAScript6 is probably going to be coming next year. And when it comes, it's going to change a lot of stuff. So there are a lot of new features in it, like there's a native module system. This is something that most of us have been wanting for a very, very long time. It's going to deal with the competing standards of AMD, asynchronous module definition, and CommonJS, which is what is used right now with Node. And I gotta admit, I'm really curious what's going to happen with Node once ES6 comes along and there's this different module system. So that's going to be interesting. But it brings other things like classes and native promises, arrows like what we've seen in CoffeeScript. That's going to be standard, so people aren't going to be able to complain about it anymore, which is going to be kind of awesome for us CoffeeScript enthusiasts. There's a whole bunch of other stuff if you're interested, and you probably should be because it's not going to be optional soon, like next year. Might want to start taking a look at what's going to change. ECMAScript6 is not going to break backwards compatibility, but if you're using packages or libraries, helper functions, stuff like that, that other people use, and it's kind of hard not to, it's going to affect all of us, regardless of which frameworks we're using or which tool sets we're using. So it's pretty big news. And that brings us to Tracer. So let's talk about preprocessors for a little bit. Tracer is a project from Google which transcompiles ECMAScript6 to ECMAScript5 so that you can use it in browsers today, since there really are no JavaScript interpreters that have full support for ES6 since it's not even finalized yet. But there are bits and pieces here and there. So this allows you to use ECMAScript6 today. And it is from Google, and Google has, I think, they've said quite a few times that they're kind of annoyed with the limitations of JavaScript as it exists today. And they have tons and tons of projects that are web-based already, and most of us use them. And they'd really like to see more features available in JavaScript, which is why they made Dart, which unfortunately, or fortunately, hasn't really caught on outside of Google. But it's still new, and obviously it's still in flux as the standard is in flux. So it's not real clear to me if people are actually building production applications using this yet. Does anybody know? Anybody tried this yet?
Angular2 is going to use it.
We're getting there.
React is written in ES6.
It did?
Yeah.
So how do you...
I'm not sure what exactly. I mean, I may use Tracer or another transpiler.
Hoping to use it soon.
What?
I'm hoping to use it soon.
Well, let us know what happens. So that brings us to TypeScript. So TypeScript is a preprocessor from Microsoft that adds, it's a strict superset of JavaScript, of ECMAScript 5. and it adds static typing and classes. So this is something that most Java developers or C# developers, it makes them feel a little bit more at home, and it helps with things like, I can't even remember, what is the name of Microsoft's IE?
Visual Studio?
Thank you. It helps with Visual Studio support. So, when you're working in IDE, you can easily find out what a function will take as parameters, stuff like that. This has been around for a few years, and it's getting some support. Then there's also everybody's favorite, CoffeeScript. I'll admit I'm kind of a CoffeeScript fan. So the preprocessor from Jeremy Ashkenas, the guy that made Backbone, and its big features are that it really helps you save keystrokes, and it makes things a lot simpler. It looks a lot more like Ruby or Python. It's whitespace sensitive, and it transpiles to JS, and I think it's actually ECMAScript6 that it transpiles to. Does anybody know if that's definitely true, or?
It is.
Yeah. So basically that means that it'll work in any browser all the way back to IE6, which isn't really necessary anymore, but I guess it doesn't hurt. What kind of stinks about this, though, is that there's no official roadmap for the ECMAScript6 features. So if you're going to be writing an app or moving an existing CoffeeScript app to use things that are being written with ECMAScript6, it might get kind of messy. You can still use backticks to escape JavaScript code in the middle of CoffeeScript, so you can use that to do things like use the ECMAScript6 module system, but other features might just get a little bit messier. So I actually went to the project maintainers directly and said, what's the deal with this? And it seems that the stance that they're taking is they're not going to try to fix anything until there's a real problem, because the standard isn't finalized yet. So I'm a little bit nervous about that.
CoffeeScript is supposed to be enabling some of those ECMAScript6 features, so there's like a fork of it.
A fork.
That defines some. What's that? I think so. There's a fork out there that does give you like the yield generator.
But if you have your arrows, shouldn't it just rename the file, right?
Oh. Guess we'll see. Yeah. So that's a bunch of news with the preprocessor stuff. Now let's talk about a little bit about JavaScript frameworks. So this is where things get really interesting. Most of these, actually, I think all of these JavaScript frameworks use semantic versioning, which is the major.minor.patch naming system, which means that the patch fixes bugs when they bump that up. The minor will usually add features, but not take features away or break things. But major updates have the potential to break things and change a lot about the way a framework will work. And there are a lot of major revisions coming to all of the tools that we all use, no matter what we use. And it's going to be kind of scary. So jQuery is being updated to version 3, which means that they're going to introduce a lot of breaking changes to what we use now. Basically, what they're going to be doing is removing deprecated features, which doesn't sound so bad until you look at all of the jQuery plugins, and you see that a bunch of them use deprecated features. So if you were wanting to upgrade to version 3 to get increased speed or newer features, in the future, you've got to deal with those legacy plugins. So there's going to be a 3.0 for evergreen browsers, and then there's going to be a compatibility version, which is kind of similar to the 1.11 something, which adds support for things like IE. I think it's just 7 and 8 now, isn't it? Did they drop 6? Well, you shouldn't be using 6 anyway. So they have tools, though, that'll allow you to go through all of the stuff that you're using and find out what's going to be compatible with 3. I don't think they've announced a date for this yet, but they've let us know that it's coming. So here's where the guts of everything are. Anybody here watch the videos from NG Europe? Yeah, did it kind of scare you a little bit? Angular 2.0 is being, what's the word, designed right now, I guess. There's no official date for it, but people are starting to ask, should we even call this Angular anymore? Because it's almost a complete rewrite. 1.x was aimed at designers when they created it, and they're starting to think that a lot of bad assumptions were made, and they want to fix those in 2.x and make 2.0 really about developers instead of designers. One of the biggest problems with 1.x is that the binding system, the two-way binding system, really doesn't scale very well because it's, I don't know if it's hackish is the right word, but it's not pretty. Especially if you go into the Angular code and look at what actually updates the screen when you change something in memory, it's some real voodoo going on right there, and they're trying to update that. So the Angular guys, or the people involved with making these decisions, are saying that the browser landscape has been changing a lot, and Angular needs to change with it. When they made 1.x 5 years ago, things were a lot different. Phones were a lot less common. Touch events weren't really a big deal. But now we have ECMAScript6, we have web components coming along. There's a lot of touch stuff that you have to think about right out of the box. And they're questioning everything, and they're even questioning two-way binding. And it's really hard for me to imagine an Angular without two-way binding. So none of these things are in stone, but there's going to be no more jQuery Lite. There's going to be no more. You don't have to use jQuery if you don't want to. There's going to be no more scope. There's going to be no more controller. A lot of this stuff is just totally different. And they also announced AtScript, which is a superset of TypeScript. So this is what they're writing.
The Google people announced that?
Yes. So Google is working with Microsoft to make AtScript on top of TypeScript and on top of Tracer, so that they have like 3 transpilers working on the Angular 2.0 code base. And it spits out ES5 JavaScript and Dart out of that for Angular Dart 2.0. So they say that if you want the best Angular 2.0 experience, you're probably going to want to be using all of these transcompilers when you write your code, which is a big change for a lot of us. And they're saying that this is not a new language, that AtScript is not a new language. It's really just an extension of TypeScript. But right now, TypeScript is not entirely ES6 compatible, so they're still working on these things. And it's important to note that Google has over 1,600 internal Angular 1.x apps. So they're not going to be just dropping this and saying, you guys can go figure this out for yourselves while you rewrite your entire code base. They're invested in this too. But it's
But
something...
they did kind of say that they're just going to drop it in like 18 months.
Yeah, no, they did.
But in reality, right?
But they can't entirely. I mean, it's not like they could just rewrite every single thing.
They backpedaled from that a little bit.
Yeah. It's kind of a dumb thing to say, it seems.
The cool thing about this, though, is if you don't like what's going on, or you want to change things or be involved, it's an open source project, right? So if you want something to change or be different than what they're saying in these forums, jump in there. And, get involved. That's what it's all about, right?
Except for the design of Angular 2.
No, there are people that aren't in Google who are involved in that.
That was one of the criticism I saw of 2.
Yeah. There's a lot of criticism of 2, as you might expect, because it's a big change. Did I miss anything? Does anybody know of anything else going on with Angular 2? No? More craziness?
Are they
So-
calling it Ember.js?
Well, so as you might imagine, the Ember guys are just like, oh yeah, this is great, because I mean, how many of us have been in situations where you make an app, and then all of a sudden you realize the tools that you used to make the app are no longer the new hotness, and everybody's rushing over to something else. I think anybody that made a Backbone app is kind of feeling this to some degree. So the Ember guys are making sure that everybody knows that they don't plan on doing what the Angular team is doing, which is changing a lot of stuff. They say that they want to bring stability without stagnation. That is the official term that they're using. And but there is a 2.0 of Ember coming soon too, and this is going to be kind of like the jQuery update, which is deprecating or removing the deprecated features. But they're adding new features gradually on a modular code base. So you may have heard in the past that Ember had done a lot of big changes early on, and I get the impression that that was to keep something bad from happening in the future, right? They dealt with the problems earlier instead of later. So they're going to keep adding new features, and some of them are pretty cool. They're going to have ES6 modules in there soon, and they're also adding a virtual DOM, which is inspired by React. And a virtual DOM is all about keeping a representation of your DOM in memory, and then when something changes in your app, the framework will do a diff between the virtual DOM and the real DOM, and it'll only change the pieces that need to be changed, which increases performance and makes things a lot easier to deal with. So I thought that was kind of cool. But then there's, you know, the old standby Backbone, and Backbone is just like, whatever, nothing's really changing here. You're gonna have to use jQuery, and most Backbone apps are full of jQuery plugins. So you're probably gonna have to check with those if you're moving to jQuery 3. But this is one of those times when using a small framework, which you can even call Backbone a framework, can kind of be nice, right? Because it's so small that nobody's really going to pull the rug out from under you. But again, this is all about, I mean, nothing that we've talked about here is not open. It's all open standards. It's all open source. So if any of this stuff ticks you off, or if you love it, you want to get involved with it, nobody's stopping you. There's no, giant company that's dictating how these things are going to go, which is great. It wasn't like this 20 years ago. So, any questions or corrections? Did I get anything wrong, or other things you guys have heard?
I have a question. When they were talking about Angular, and 1 being for designers, 2 being for developers and scope, or performance, scaling, was there any talk about like what you work on, Internet of Things or headless code?
Well, it all happens in the browser, so probably nothing headless.
Okay.
But, I mean, it will be interesting to see what happens with the Node.js story as ECMAScript6 comes online, I guess. I think it's more browser done. So.
Well, the Node.js is kind of changing their structure too and how with their governance. They're still trying to be flexible, but bring more process to it.
Did you say Angular2 is about ECMAScript4? 5. Okay, one of the
Well,
is 6.
Say it's gonna.
Just for backwards compatibility, it's not based heavily on 6, but it'll go out on
I think they're planning on you being able to use AdScript and then spit out just like raw ECMAScript6, and you can run that in the browser when browsers support it too. But ECMAScript4 is basically dead unless you're a Flash developer. If those exist anymore.
There's also all of them.
Yeah.
Which is juicy.
Well, it sounds like they might integrate a lot of that into Angular 2.
Can you remind us what Polymer is?
So I haven't spent a lot of time with that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a framework that brings web components into the browser today. So it allows you to take different chunks of your page and actually make a module out of them so that you can have JavaScript and CSS and HTML completely isolated. And then you can share off pieces completely independently. Because, I mean, how many times have you brought in a new like jQuery plugin with a CSS style sheet that you have to add to your page, and then things conflict, and then you have to start renaming your classes because the styles will collide with each other? This would keep that from happening.
Kind of like what directives were supposed to be in Angular, but couldn't be.
Yeah, they couldn't be. Yeah, so it's kind of like directives, but also more modular.
And that's available now?
They don't recommend it for production, but you can use it.
It's experimental.
So use at your own risk.
One of the things I found interesting with Angular 2 was the modularization of it, and trying to bring parts of Angular into like a backbone app. So to use Angular's dependency injection to kind of help with unit testing. Because required JS can be kind of a pain sometimes to knock out things.
Yeah.
But I gave that up once I started down the transpiler rabbit hole.
Part of that modularization story the front end piece of it? Like, I mean, right now Angular kind of does a lot of messing with the DOM, but it sounded to me, I didn't watch much of the videos, but it sounded to me like they were moving away from that a little bit. You could use whatever front end you wanted, kind of. Is that accurate? Like whatever rendering layer you wanted? Right now, a lot of people use React for particular parts of a page in an Angular app, for example.
I haven't read anything or watched anything about that specifically. So, I don't know.
We will see.
On a different topic, Meteor 1.0 release
Yeah.
last week. That's actually a pretty neat framework and things pretty quick to develop a cool, CRUD app or whatever.
Are you guys using it?
And we're playing around with it. It's actually pretty amazing for what you can do. Data binding between server and client, as opposed to Angular data binding between JavaScript and web app. That's kind of way the simple terms the high-level headline I put from Meteor. But developing an app is really quick. Really, very few lines of code.
Firebase was bought by Google.
Oh yeah.
You're familiar with it, but it's I guess you could describe it as a database service.
Yeah.
I think it's a backend as a service, isn't it?
I mean, they claim not to change.
Do you think they bought it to acquire the talent? Because Google is the biggest backend you can have, correct?
Yeah.
They don't need it.
It was really nice with Angular.
I think they bought it to acquire the talent.
It seemed like a similar move based on buying parts, just get developers wrapped into their ecosystem.
It seemed like they wanted to shape where Firebase grows, so they had more control over what features they worked on and roll out.
Eric, I'm just curious, do we have anyone queued up to talk about upcoming changes in ES6 or anything like that? Or would that be something we'd be interested in hearing about?
I
wanna
think
do
it
the
would be
research in?
very relevant.
Yeah. Inputs.
Classes for
Do we know if there are going to be any changes to like our active with some of the news that have happened with like ES6 and I guess the direction of Angular 2.0? Like, mustache-like two-way binding, or?
I don't know. I mean,
I didn't know if
there's just so much going on with all the different frameworks and digesting it and trying to figure out what they're going to do
Because
next.
a lot of this stuff just happened in the last few weeks. I think people are still digesting it and trying to figure out what they're going to do next.
Hey, here. What was your talk about again?
Well, I still do have a little bit to say about JavaScript apps in OS 10. So I'll admit that when I announced this, I had never tried it before because Yosemite wasn't out, so I had no idea what this meant. I'd seen blog posts about it and developer previews, but I dove into it. It's brand new for OS 10 Yosemite. Anybody ever hear that quote that said, "Everywhere that JavaScript can run, it will run"? And this is kind of more of that, where now you can build OS 10 apps, like real OS 10 apps with JavaScript.
This is what Steve Jobs told us when he announced the iPhone, right?
I'm sure this is the culmination of his dream right here, JavaScript everywhere. So it's really new, and I haven't been able to spend a whole lot of time with it. But in order to get started, you open up this app called Script Editor. Maybe you've used this before for automation. That's what it had traditionally been used for, so you'd use AppleScript. And then eventually they added Objective-C to that, so you could automate your machine with Objective-C. And then you got the benefits of all of these Objective-C things, like the windowing systems and different form elements, stuff like that. All the things that you would get from a traditional Mac app. And then just this year they added JavaScript on top of that, which is just weird. When you look at it, it's like, really? It's just strange. But you can do a lot more than just automation now. It started at something very simple, but when you add all of those libraries for Objective-C and all of the automation libraries for AppleScript, things get pretty interesting, and in different ways than I ever expected. So what this uses is the JavaScriptCore JavaScript engine that exists in Safari, and they just took it out of the browser and threw it on the back end, which sounds familiar, right? It's a lot like V8 from Google and Node. But like Node, you have Node.
Their engine was called? Sorry, wasn't there any called Nitro, or was that a different browser?
That's something different.
Yeah. The official project is JavaScriptCore. but like Node, you have no DOM and no window element or object. Sorry. So when you open up the script editor, you get a window kind of like this, where it's just you write your code. There's no files to manage. It's not really a full-fledged IDE. It's almost like Notepad. But it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because what it seems to be doing, and I'm not entirely sure about this, but it seems to be compiling some kind of Objective-C like Mac app when you save this, because it's a whole what do they call it? It's like an application bundle in OS 10, where you can right-click on an app and then inspect it, and you see all of these different resources that the app uses. You get the same kind of thing coming out of this. And I gotta thank Tyler Goff for these examples. He wrote a blog post when Yosemite was in beta, and took a lot of inspiration from that. So this is an example of one of the apps, and you can see in this example, you import Cocoa, the UI framework in OS 10, and then you have this. So this $sign here is not jQuery; it's the bridge from JavaScript to Cocoa, and then you have access to all of the classes that you would if you were writing in Objective-C. And I gotta be honest, when I started doing this, I thought, well, why don't I just write it in Objective-C if I'm just using all of these Cocoa classes? But I suppose if you're really into JavaScript, you might want to do something like this.
Plus, it's more work if you were to do it in Objective-C.
No.
3 people said yeah when I said no.
What's the easiest Objective-C? It's just as easy.
But don't you have to init and alloc separately for
No,
everything?
it's-
Other?
No, they have built-in memory management now, so it's not hard. And you get multiple threads, so.
It's like CoffeeScript, though. It's less typing.
I don't know about that though, because you're still working with all of the same objects.
Yeah.
And you've got to handle them in the same ways. And there's nothing magic going on here. It's
No,
just
no.
the JavaScript is the glue.
It's pretty cool, though.
Putting it up. Yeah, it is kind of cool.
So is this the same bridge that Swift uses? Or is there not really a bridge for
I
Swift?
don't think it works in the same way.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that.
You're in video.
When did you get here? So when you run that example, here's what happens. You get this, it looks like a regular Mac app, which is kind of cool because this is something that Node doesn't give you, is the ability to run a native app on your host machine.
Did you get the file menu for quitting or just a window?
Yeah, no, you
get the
do.
file menu?
Yeah,
So that's an actual Cocoa UI, not
right,
yeah.
right.
Not
This
a
is
web
not
page.
the DOM. You're actually using JavaScript with a native Cocoa UI. And yeah, I'll get to more things about that later. But I think there's potential here for some kind of mashup. A lot of interesting mashup ideas that have never really been possible before because you have access to a lot of the things that are built into your Mac. Like you can use voice control with this. And I've never been able to use voice control on my JavaScript apps before. So besides just making Cocoa apps, you still have all the automation features too. So if you go to, what is it called again? You can view libraries. So all of the applications running in OS X, they all have APIs behind them for automation. So you can mix these Cocoa UIs with automation and have JavaScript as the glue to make your Mac do all kinds of crazy stuff that I've only begun to figure out exactly what this means. But you can see that there are a lot of apps in here, like even Microsoft Office is in here, so you can automate that stuff. And just let your imagination run wild a little bit and think about how many tasks that seem ridiculous you could automate with this. So when you click on one of those apps, you get a window kind of like this, which shows you your JavaScript API for each of those applications. It's kind of cool. What's kind of lame about it, though, is you do have only that one window, right? You can't split up your application into separate files, and you don't really have any imports, apart from importing the applications and the Cocoa stuff. So I don't think you'd want to write something very big in the script editor. But that really got me thinking about comparing and contrasting Node with using JavaScript on OS X. So I think Node is really good at running on a lot of different platforms, and it's really, and you have the JavaScript for OS X. It's only OS X. Node is really good at networking things, but using JavaScript on OS X, I couldn't find any way to network things easily unless I started using some Objective-C libraries. It's not like you can just bring in jQuery and start making AJAX requests. So it's kind of strange. And on Node.js, you have a lot of really good APIs, and you have NPM if you want to use third-party libraries. You don't really have any of that stuff on the Mac. And but one of the really nice things about the Mac is that you can actually just bundle up an app, and then you can use code signing and distribute that to people that you work with, and they can just run the app really, really easily. Whereas if you're going to share a Node app with somebody, you're either creating a web app, or they'd have to install Node, and then they'd have to npm install and run it and make sure that it's staying up and running. They're very different kinds of tools, but they're similar in a lot of ways. Yep.
Don't you bundle your app as Node WebKit, and then you get the benefits of Node, but it's a web app, but you're both using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then you can make all of your files
Yeah,
And it runs on both OS X and Windows.
I suppose you could do that, yeah. But then you wouldn't have access to all of the same APIs either.
I don't know the extent to which you don't have access, but you definitely have access to more than just nothing.
Right. Yeah.
It's more than nothing, but
You can load Cocoa and Node.
I don't know about Cocoa. But you can definitely access like core, like machine features more than just like one simple web app.
Yeah, you can access the file system.
Yes.
We've also used a library in Node called FFI to access C library runtimes from JavaScript and actually kind of write the bridges.
Yeah.
So that's another option.
Sounds like a lot more work though.
It is.
Who wants that?
FFI is foreign function interface or something like that.
Yep. So that's all I have for that. Any questions on JavaScript and OS 10?
Yeah, is this like a part of that whole new like Swift thing, or is it separate from that?
This
Or?
is separate from that.
So have you compared this to the Swift environment?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I'm kind of caught in the JavaScript world. It
Swift
looked
is very
tempting.
JavaScripty. I mean, it's not JavaScript, but it's very much along the same lines. But it does allow you to do like a full-fledged OS X app.
Yeah. I'd really like to try it.
It's fun. You can use a real IDE.
Yes. That's it.
That's interesting. Text in. Did they say what their use was for this? I remember when when they announced it, they were opening up JavaScript more. But what did they say the actual use cases were for doing such a thing besides automating, which is exactly what this old scripting did anyway?
Yeah, they focused a lot on the automating. Just like, here's another option for you if you feel more comfortable with it, with Java. Because a lot of people know JavaScript already. And
So this is competing with AppleScripts, basically?
and AppleScript is kind of a strange language. If you've never used it before, it's not similar to a lot of other things that we're used to.
It seems like they're backing away from AppleScript, hoping that JavaScript takes over a lot of that functionality.
Yeah, I don't know that JavaScript is what you want to go to. Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Have you tried embedding a web UI view using JavaScript and talk across each other yet?
I don't think I hate myself enough yet to try it.
Oh, come on. That would be like the first thing I'd try.
After this, let's pair.
You're definitely the outer spoon on that one.
There will be no spinning.
Code of conduct.
I do know that you can use JavaScriptCore on iOS though as well. Titanium is a JavaScript runtime. It uses JavaScriptCore for their stuff, so you can do it that way too.
I assume that the project whose name I just forgot, Apache Cordova, I assume has a similar approach. Yeah.
But that actually runs in a UI web view, doesn't it?
Yep.
Last time.
So then you have access to all of the standard browser objects, which are missing. That's what's so crazy about using the automation tools.
So that's significantly different from the way Titanium does it?
Yeah, so Titanium actually does bridge. So they actually write currently Objective-C, but they're moving towards JavaScriptCore to do it all. And then you actually just write JavaScript and Node, then it compiles it into JavaScriptCore and runs it natively. So you get all the native controls that you would in iOS normally, but you can write JavaScript instead.
It's Frankenstein's monster.
Is Titanium open source?
It is. I use it every day.
That's all I have. You want to
Sure, I'll set
set up?
not going to be any